What is intercultural tension and does it still exist in our globalized world? We will search for the answers from Claire Ivins, an American with a Norwegian background. She has spent 17 years in China and has studied intercultural communication at Boise State University. Claire has founded Cikaår, a company that helps to bridge the gap between different cultures in international organizations and business partnerships. Hello, Claire, and thank you very much for participating in this interview.
Thank you for having me.
We live in a globalized world. Are tensions linked with cultural differences still a thing?
Yes, I can say without a doubt that cultural differences have an impact in business, even though we're still global. I've been working in the intercultural field and in international business for 10 years. And almost every international collaboration is going to face some sort of challenge.
Are there any sectors from the business or some industries that are prone to more tensions than others?
I would say anytime that there's an international collaboration, you're going to have to deal with that. I can give you an example of a project that kind of launched me into wanting to spend my life working on these topics. It was a French-American collaboration. So I'm American and I live in France. So it's two cultures that I'm quite familiar with. And it came to a point in this collaboration on a multi-billion-dollar project that the Americans and the French could no longer stand each other. They had to remove the program managers on this project because there was too much tension. So when they called me in, they said, we don't think it's cultural. We think there's something else going on. It's really complex, but we would like you to maybe come take a look. So I interviewed the Americans and the French, and in the end, all of the issues were tied to misunderstandings that became worse and worse with time, and all of those misunderstandings were based on their different perceptions of things, which in the end is cultural.
Well, which types of differences actually cause the most tensions? Is it religion, is it language, or it is simply culture?
So culture is basically the way we think and the way we process and see the world. So that can be influenced by a lot of things, like you said, like religion, and it's basically the fruit of our environment. The differences that tend to cause the most tension, just to give you a few examples, decision-making styles, management styles, how you manage conflict and communication. But I would say two of the main ones are still communication and trust, how we communicate with people and how we build trust with people. And in the example that I gave you of the French and American teams, the communication broke down between the engineering teams on some very basic things like how do the engineers write out their specifications. The French people tended to write less detailed specifications, so they would assume that the Americans should know certain things and they would not include it in the text, whereas the Americans needed more detail and the French weren't giving it to them. So the Americans thought the French didn't know what they wanted. And in the end, the Americans didn't do what the French wanted and the French got mad at them. But it was just a question of how to communicate their specifications. So another thing that in this collaboration that broke down was trust with the client. The client, being American, they preferred a really transparent approach when there was a problem with the French supplier. They preferred for the French supplier to immediately come to them, tell them there was a problem, and work together collaboratively on the solution. However, the French, they preferred to have an approach of solving the problem internally before going to the client, so that when they arrived to the client, they could say, there was a problem, but here's the solution. Except the Americans thought that they were actually hiding things from them. So it broke down trust, even though the French people's intention was to build trust by coming with a solution. So how we build trust can be very different, and it can actually cause quite a bit of difficulty in building trust between clients and suppliers or within teams.
So when you give us these two examples about problem solving, are there examples as well as about the decision-making tendencies of the two nations as well?
Yes, so decision-making is a big one, not just between the French and Americans, but within European countries as well. Some cultures tend to make decisions more quickly, and then the result is that you can change along the way. So we decide we go this way, and then maybe along the way we can change. Some cultures tend to wait a long time and debate ideas and really think about all of the risks until they finally feel that they have enough elements to make a decision. So when you're working with a culture that tends to debate ideas, and that tends to be more of a French way of approaching things, and then we come to, okay, the best decision we can make because we have all of these different ideas that we're confronted. So it can take longer. And so when that type of culture works with a culture that tends to make a decision and then just go, like the American culture, it can feel frustrating for both sides.
Okay, this frustration causes disputes, but what are the signs that such disputes are happening in a company?
So if you want to know whether or not a dispute is cultural, is that the question? Basically, if there are international aspects in the collaboration, if people are from different countries, there will always be a cultural layer to it. It doesn't explain everything. There's going to be organizational issues, personal differences, even corporate culture differences. However, if there are people from different countries, there will always be an intercultural layer to the issues. And we find, actually, my colleague Kapka Stojkova, who's from Bulgaria, she often says that the intercultural method of approaching problems is a good way to depersonalize the issues. Instead of focusing on the problem between Jean and Bob, we focus on the differences between American and French culture. So it's a way to approach the issues without making it so personal.
But how these misunderstandings and issues between the workers or the partners affect the balance sheets of a company?
Yeah, good question. That's what companies care about in the end as well. So we can't forget that aspect of it. So we talked about trust breaking down. In a client-supplier relationship, if you break down trust with your client, it could mean either losing contracts or not signing new contracts with the same client. And we've seen cases of that before. You can also look at it as a waste problem. So if a team is spending a lot of time dealing with miscommunications, frustrations, tensions, then they're obviously not being as efficient on their work. So time is money, as we know. So the inefficiency of not having a fluid communication can be a real cost to companies.
Can such friction be prevented, and can it be remedied after it happens?
Yes, so it can be prevented. We always prefer when in a project when things happen up front and the awareness is gained in the beginning so that the problems can be avoided. In the French-American situation that I told you about, they were 4 years into the project already. So tensions were already quite high. And after working with them for about a year, all of the Americans and the French said, we should have done all of this 4 years ago in the beginning of the project. So how can you, so your question was how, right? Can we make sure that these things don't happen? I would say that step one is awareness, is understanding that layer of cultural influence and knowing about it. And that can be done through personal research. A few books that I could recommend that are kind of foundational works in the intercultural field would be Schopenhauer's Riding the Waves of Culture, Hofstede's Software of the Mind, and Edward T. Hall's The Silent Language. If you want a more practical book that is really connected to international business today, I would recommend Erin Meyer's The Culture Map. It has a lot of great stories and a really good way of understanding the intercultural layer in international business. Then the second step I would say is actually working with your teams to make sure that you're finding solutions, because theory is good, but it's also important to actually find real solutions. So Cikaår, my company's real objective is to take it from theory to practical application on the ground, working with a team like in that French-American situation to realize, okay, now all of our engineers, when there's a problem, we should go directly to the client because that's what the client expects from us and that's how we can build trust. Or even just now we need to write more lines in our Excel sheets because the American engineers need us to be more detailed.
But tell us, what do you actually do with the employees in a single company who have disputes linked to their cultural differences? Do you
Mhm.
organize any kinds of workshops, for example?
Yeah. So the way we really like to work with teams is going in and first listening to them, letting them express their frustrations, and then helping them understand the source of those frustrations together. So we use a model called the iceberg model. It's quite simple. It basically means that if you look at an iceberg, the part that's showing above the water is the small part, and under the water is the biggest part. And culture tends to be like that. So we like to look below the water, what's happening in terms of values and perceptions with communication, trust, decision making, and help them be able to look at the others that are different from them and realize why they are behaving the way they are behaving, to develop some empathy and understanding between the teams. And then we take them through workshops where they're actually talking about their frustrations openly together, working to understand each other. And then the next phase is actually, okay, what do we do now to meet in the middle? The goal is always to meet in the middle. How are we going to change the way we communicate, the way we work together, and agree together on a new way of working together?
But why do companies need external advisors? Can't the managers just do it by themselves?
Very good question. So a good example that I have is one of our consultants in our network. She worked in a French company as a German for 10 years, and she never really felt like culture was a big issue for her. But then she became an intercultural coach, and she realized, she said, oh, now I realize for the last 10 years that I was being very German in a French context. So before you actually are aware of the depth of the impact of culture, it's really hard to help your teams or even yourself understand what's actually happening. So the expertise of really being able to look through the cultural lens is something that people are not necessarily equipped with in companies. And that's one of our goals as well, is to equip managers.
How did the COVID-19 pandemic and remote work affect the relationships between different employees from different cultures in the same company?
That's a very good question. So we know that it affected all of us in a lot of ways, specifically in the context of teams working together remotely. I think it personally that it has made things more complicated. Why is that? Is because in the past, a lot of our clients said if there was really a big problem, I knew I could get on an airplane and I could go and we could spend time working on the problem, and often having physical contact and spending time together would move the issues ahead more quickly. And now there is not even a possibility to do that anymore. So especially cultures where relationship building is an important part of working together successfully, the fact that people can't travel at all is a challenge.
Which cultures actually have this need to have stronger relations in order to make a better business?
Yeah, good question. So, on one of the cultural dimensions is how we build trust is either more task-based or relationship-based. So, relationship-based cultures, Asian cultures in general, I don't want to generalize and put all Asian cultures in the same box, but in general, Asian cultures are more relationship-based. But even if you look at Europe, there's a difference between France, which tends to be much more relationship-based, and Germany, for example, and the Scandinavian countries, which are more task-based in how they build trust. So depending on those cultures, the impact of COVID also could be more or less important to people. So I also am an optimist in general. So I like to think that every crisis is an opportunity. And actually in Chinese, the word for crisis actually means danger and opportunity, the two characters together. So I think it's also an opportunity for people to learn how to cope and deal with the fact that they can't see each other physically anymore, by learning how to use the virtual world to create that trust and build that trust. So Cikaår is currently developing workshops to work with teams to make the virtual world actually an opportunity to work together more effectively with their international teams.
If I was participating in your workshop, what kind of activities should I do?
Yeah, good question. So we like to make our workshops really interactive. So basically, we get people in a room with a problem. And when I say a room, it's the virtual room, which you can do now on most platforms. and we'll take, for example, one of those frustration points that I talked about on the icebergs, and we'll say, okay, now get around the virtual table, work together, and suggest to each other what would be helpful, what would the solutions be. And then another part of that workshop would be looking at, okay, in a typical week or a month, what are the things that we need to adjust or change or put in place to make sure that these solutions are actually carried out within our team.
Apart from the misunderstandings between the company, between the members of the company or the employees in a company, how can businesses from different cultures bridge the gap and work together?
Yeah, good question. So I think really you need to take time to do it. A lot of people tend to think, okay, things aren't going well. We don't have time to work on the more relational side of things. But I think it's very evident to everyone now that business is a human venture. At Cikaår, we really value humans, and humans are at the center of business. So if the humans aren't able to work together properly, then the machines or the technology, it's going to have an impact on that. So I would say make it a priority to actually spend time investing on that, even if it's just reading a book about it. Otherwise, finding external help to work on those issues so that you can work more effectively together for the years to come.
Thank you very much for the interview.
Yeah, thank you for having me.